This video is about finding out who you really are after a lifetime of looking for that answer in other people. When did someone first tell you that you were allowed to be you? I'm not talking about staying up late or eating your dessert before your dinner or skipping the Brussels sprouts. I mean allowed to be what you actually are. Allowed to pursue the thing that was clearly, obviously, unmistakably in you from a very young age. Can you remember when you were allowed to actually take it seriously and build a life around it? Take a moment, think about it. For some of you, someone did say that. They saw you. A teacher, a grandmother, a stranger. Sometimes it's not till later in life, and it's sometimes the reason you fall in love with someone, because they see you, who looked at something that you made or did and said, that right there, that's real. I only remember one sentence that my grandmother said to me, and I was about 5 years old. It was this: my, Helen, you have such a big imagination, dear. I remember that moment. That's the only one. And I think it's because there was a photo taken when she said it. And I was standing in her driveway pushing a toy pram. And obviously I'd created an entire world, and I was living in it out of my own head, as little kids do. So yeah, about 5 years old. Checkered dress, and there was a red apple appliqued onto it with a green caterpillar coming out of it. And I only remember one sentence my grandfather ever said to me. He was in his work shed and he looked at me. I'd just come back from wherever I'd been. This was probably when I was about 16, and I'd already left and gone to work on the Nullarbor Plains. And he said, "You are clearly an explorer, an adventurer." That's all. That's it. 2 sentences, one from each of them. These 2 people. And those sentences locked in and have never left me. So why those 2 sentences and not hundreds of other things that they might have said to me, which they did? I think it's because they were the only true things, the ones that landed on something real that was already there. It really hit the button inside me, even just as a little kid. What true things have you heard? There won't be many, I can tell you that, but I'll bet you they're locked in there just the same. You'll have them. It's worth digging around and seeing if you can locate them. These are really important moments, and they might be in your childhood, it might be early in your creative career, at any point, might even be later. It's funny because we just only remember the things that are pertaining to our true essence. It's a great clue. And equally, people can put you down and you let that swamp over. You know why you get so offended when someone does give you a bad put down? It's because they're telling you a lie. So if you get crushed by something someone says, the only reason you get crushed by it is generally when you're young, not later when you build up your antibodies and your ego, but when you're young, if someone criticizes your true nature, your essence, you never forget that. I could actually rattle those off for you as well. I remember them very clearly. It's just a misjudgment by someone else projecting onto you, but it's amazingly accurate. But unfortunately for many of you, you might not have actually had anything said to you like that at all, or you just can't remember it. If you can't remember it, well, nobody said it. Nobody pointed at what was in you and actually named it. I see you. Has anyone said that to you? I see you. It's a remarkable moment. And when they say your name, I very rarely hear my name. And when someone says Helen, everything goes on alert. It's just so amazing. Even when you're talking to your friends, how often do you say their name? It's kind of nice if you do. So the differentiation here, and what I wanted to talk about, is that if you can't recall that, no one's actually handed you the permission slip. I know this from like thousands of even comments here that I've read, and decades of talking to creative people, relatives, friends, because I'm a typology nutcase, obsessed. So through the process of, working with them to define their real nature through that tool, there are so many people that have no idea, don't even have any clue as to what their essence is. And here's the thing I wanted to explore today. It's not like the permission was withheld from you, like, a deliberate cruel act or a suppression. In almost every case, it just didn't exist in the room. It wasn't something that people did, or you weren't in that company. People can love you, but not see that, not see who you are. That's where we talk about projection, right? It could just be that nobody knew that it was theirs to give. And that's very common in our culture at the moment. Nobody even thought to give it, because this has been completely yanked out of how we raise our children, how we speak to each other, as friends, as lovers, as parents. That's a cultural thing. We in the West pride ourselves on being, independent thinkers, being so wonderfully individual, and yet most of us struggle to know who on earth we actually are, even well into later life. You might think you know who you are, but we wouldn't be having midlife crisis everywhere if that was the case. Because everything around us, the culture, the institutions, the people of influence, they're all far too busy trying to fit us into a box that serves what they are selling, promoting, or wanting for themselves. That is a kind of poverty, not of money, but of core essence. It's a cycle. It's a big cycle, and that cycle is just handed down. It's really evolved out of our nuclear family culture, which started, way back in the 1970s, I suppose, where the extended family was stripped away and you lost that contact with the elders, who were more inclined to point these things out because they just had that bit more life experience under their belt to be able to see it. It's the great loss of the elders in our society. They're all either on a cruise, going around the world, or like a retirement village or nursing homes, whatever. They're living their own best life, maybe, and we're not, sharing in the village, because those people had time to observe and see and watch these kids and pick up their way. If someone can't find it in themselves, they're not going to be trying to point it out in someone else. So they can't exactly give it to you, can they? Generally, we're all so self-obsessed with our own problems. So this is a very different problem when it's not even in the room to give. And understanding the difference is, I think, the beginning of everything. It's not mean, it's just this void, which is really sad. The word. I'll start with my own story, because I think it's probably representative. My story and the particular details about it, they're going to belong to me, okay, but the shape of it, that's what I'm going after. That belongs to most of us, and that's the actual point. It's the metaphor. I grew up in inner suburban Melbourne, right close to the city, in a very working class culture. Now, I want to be careful here, because I'm not using that phrase as a complaint, and I'm not using it to blame anyone. There's nothing wrong with a working class family. My parents were really decent people, and they did their absolute best in the world that they understood and the pressures they were under. But that world, as I mentioned before, had a particular shape that was being designed by the culture makers, and that shape did not include a roadmap for creative life. Art was fine, doing stuff was fine, creating things. Nobody told me I was wrong for drawing or making things or writing poetry, but as a serious occupation, as a life, it just wasn't even in the picture, pardon the pun. The question of what you would become when you grew up had a fairly legible set of answers in the culture that I grew up in. From my family's perspective, you got a trade or you got a job and you got a qualification in something, and it wasn't to do with what you liked. You got a job and you contributed, you paid your way. Those were the values at that time, and they weren't bad values. Sometimes I think we should return to them. They were survival values, and they were handed down from people of previous generations that basically didn't have welfare and they needed to work to survive, to put bread on the table. But nobody, not a single person ever looked at me and said, there is something very specific in you and it deserves to be developed. And here is the path toward it. No one said that. Only a couple of teachers saw it in me. And as far as those people that had the power over me, if you like, which is your parents, it wasn't because they were withholding, pointing that out. It was just that the language didn't exist in the household, in that street, or in that particular corner of the world that I grew up in. It wasn't part of the culture. I was naturally attracted when I was old enough to go on my own on a tram to the city. I wasn't stopped from doing that, and I would go straight to the State Art Gallery, spend an enormous amount of time down in the museum looking at artefacts and things, and then I would come up and look at the art. I preferred the artefacts. And also, when I was very young, I got curious about church. We were not a religious family at all, it was the opposite. And so I asked Mum and Dad if they minded if I went to Sunday school, and I was allowed to go and check it out by myself. And I did for a little while to see if I could work out what all the fuss was about. They didn't stop me from exploring. And my mum, and I say this with real love, was enormously supportive in the way that she understood support to work. She was what I'd call an open road mum. Whatever you want, darling. I just want you to be happy. I don't mind what you do as long as you enjoy it. That was her philosophy for all of us. Now that sounds great, doesn't it? And in many ways it was. There was no pressure, no preordained path. The road was wide open. She was so good at that. We always felt that it was up to us what we chose. But I remember being about 12 years old and testing this open road policy. Oh God, it was a pain in the ass as a kid. I said to her, so Mum, if we wanted to be a garbo, as in a garbage collector, that would be fine with you, would it? Would that be okay? And she said, yes, if that's what you wanted and it made you happy. It's just amazing. That has stuck in my head. Mum saying that if being a garbo makes you happy, that's completely fine. Look at that dichotomy. I remember being really impressed by that consistency and her non-judgmental aspect of that, but also really unsatisfied by it. It haunts me. I think about it a lot because what I was actually fishing for, I think, in hindsight, which is what every creative person is fishing for, they don't realise it at the time, it wasn't that I wanted permission to do anything because, I already thought that I could do anything. It was the recognition of the specific thing in me. It was someone saying, I see what's in you. I see the particular shape of it. I see your potential. And it's telling you it's real, it matters, and it's worth your whole life. My father was kind of the opposite. He was so self-absorbed in the way that, which was just part of the culture at the time. Men of that generation were pretty much, that's how the world operated, and the world organised itself around Dad's requirements, and the rest of us navigated around that. That's just how it was. No judgment there. The question of what I would become was raised mainly in the context of when I would begin contributing financially. That went for all of us. I've got 4 brothers. Dad thought we should be paying board and rent from around age 13. So that meant if we wanted to stay at school after that, we would have to get a paper round or some part-time job so we could contribute. Things were worse back in the old days when kids had to work in the mines. I'm not saying any of this with bitterness at all. I'm just saying it because I really do suspect that a lot of you will recognise this in your own version. Your details will be different to mine. The culture might be different, but the shape is the same. The idea is the same. You arrived in a world that didn't have a slot for what you were, and nobody around you had the tools to actually see it clearly enough to name it. It just didn't get named. So you didn't get any leg up on, knowing yourself. And so you grow up uncertain as to whether or not it's real or even matters. And so we've been waiting for some part of ourselves ever since, like waiting for someone with this sufficient authority to look at what we've made and say, yes, that, you're allowed. No wonder we get into trouble with resenting authority. The problem with waiting. Here's where I want to pause, because this is really important. That waiting, the waiting for the external permission, is one of the most common and really devastating patterns that I see in creative people. It's really tricky. It operates in very sophisticated ways. It doesn't always look like insecurity. And as I've mentioned before, if you've got a really successful career, it's even harder to find it, because that persona, which is like a mask, trumps everything. So sit down and shut up. I'm doing just fine out here. Sometimes it looks like perfectionism. That's how it manifests. Sometimes it looks like over-research or perpetual preparation. I fall into it. Or the habit of finishing everything except the last 5%. Oh, sometimes it looks like brilliant work that you've done and you never show it. It's just in the drawer or the rack. How many of us have got those? You just lose steam, put it away. What all of these have in common is a concealed question. Am I allowed? And the tragedy is that the person who could answer that question, as in the authority figure who would finally make it real, almost certainly doesn't exist. Or if they do exist, they don't have the specific knowledge of you required to issue the permission that you actually need. It's a pretty big ask. And here's the thing, the permission that you actually need is very specific. Artists are valid, or creative work is legitimate. You already know that. They're all just like these cliches. They mean nothing, absolutely nothing. Everybody's creative. Big deal. You've known all that stuff for years. Permission just slides right off it. It's useless. It doesn't touch anything inside you. The permission that you really need is very particular. It's this specific thing that lives in you, this exact way of seeing and responding to the world. That is real and it's yours, and you are authorized to build your life around it. There's no one else that's authorized to do that. And that permission, only you can actually give it, because only you have the complete information, the whole story. It was your stuff. The problem is that nobody tells you that. It's got to be about the core of you. You can't generalize that. And in the absence of like that core knowledge, you know, how do you get in there? How do you get inside here? If you don't know that method, then we're always going to outsource the authorization to whoever is nearest at that stage in our life. Like, you know, when we're kids, it might be parents, teachers, and then it becomes galleries, could even be a husband or a wife, institutions, critics, audiences, or I don't know, YouTubers, social media algorithms. We hand the permission slip to whoever we think is getting closest to what we need, to strangers. And we respond, like, why would you buy a book? You buy it because that person has hit the buttons inside you. They seem to know you. But the trouble is that unless you actually get inside yourself, it never really comes back completely filled in correctly, like you missed something in the form. The typology, my favourite. Now, I want to bring in an idea that I've been developing for most of my adult life, and that underpins almost everything I do on this channel. Just bear with me because it reframes everything I've just said. I've spent decades studying what I think of as typology. It's the idea that human beings arrive in the world with a particular nature, a bent, an essence, a specific set of propensities, inclinations, hunger, whatever, that are already there on day one. It's like a pre-set up template, something closer to a blueprint than a preference. You use preferences to identify it, but it's a lot more significant than that. The circumstances of our lives will shape how it expresses itself and gets squashed too, but the underlying nature, that came with you. This isn't a new idea, of course, as you can find versions of it in Jung's theory of psychological types, in the ancient Greek concepts of the daemon and the guiding spirit in each person. Hillman's work on soul's code. I often refer to the Inuit Indians, even the Australian Aboriginals had their version of this. In the Hindu understanding of Dharma as one's innate duty and nature, it rocks up there too. Every serious wisdom tradition in human history has had a version of this observation, that people arrive with a shape, I prefer to call it a template, and that really matters. You can actually group it. Everyone's individual, but there's this template that's uniquely yours. What I find particularly interesting and what connects directly to the permission problem is the distribution of types. Healthy communities thrive when they allow natural laws to function freely. Human differences are essential and will always escape technological or administrative control. And true human potential requires working together as a synced community with those differences intact, not a digitised swarm of imprisoned citizens, which is what seems to be the plan coming up. I guarantee it will fail. It's just how much damage they do in the meantime. For example, in any healthy human community across all of recorded history, the distribution of natures has been remarkably consistent. It is my go-to. You know, there's the organisers, the ones who find like a sort of a deep satisfaction with creating order and structure, and there's different versions of those too. Some are visionary and some are actually more managerial. There's the leaders, some are more introverted, some are more extroverted, some are empire building, and some are actually more about these inner vision. They're leaders through this inner vision. The ones built for holding the vision and directing others in that. There's hunters, doers, collectors, people that are energized, I guess, by action and physical mastery. I call them the artisans. There's the nurturers, the caregivers, and the social weavers who hold communities together and manipulate them through their knowledge. That's another one. And all of these particular natures can actually go into the negative and use their wonderful gifts in the negative. So there's that too. And then there are the ones I think that a lot of you probably are, who knows, since you're here though, attracted to this channel, and you would be the seers. As creatives, you might be artists, poets, storytellers, I guess the shamans in the oldest sense of that word. The ones whose nature is to go inward to process experience at great depth and to bring something back up from that depth and hand it to the community in a form they can use. It's not just all like, you know, navel gazing for your own narcissistic need. It is very personal, but there is this other aspect which we sometimes forget, and why I think we end up in pathology with mental disorders is that there is a lack of understanding about how this needs to be put back into the community. These roles have been buggered up, and so it becomes pathology in a person. There's nowhere for them to express this amazing quality. If we can't find the vessel or container to express it practically in a real hands-on way, not virtually as a passive listener or bystander, the gift malfunctions. Its flow is blocked, and this causes pathology. It's like a blocked blood vessel. There must be an outward action of writing, art, music, ceremony, through the body, not just the mind, for this to stay healthy and express itself fully. This type has always been, not as common, and also this type is essential in a healthy community. And you can see in communities even today where they have a healthy respect for their creatives, that it just feels good. They like the creativity. You see it a lot in, where towns might or cities might really engage with, I don't know, sort of like beautiful wall murals and things. That's where it's really made into culture. You see it a lot more in Mexico and places like that. So I'm sure you all can think of places you've been and thought, oh, it's even in architecture. In ancient communities, these people had a very specific and recognised function. They were greatly respected, and the community understood that these people were doing something necessary. They were processing the collective experience and making meaning, like basically feeding the soul of the tribe. And other people just couldn't comprehend the complexity, and it looks like a loony bin, but it's someone who's, off with the fairies. But it's only because we've isolated it from the health of our tribe, our modern tribe. I mean, the tragedy of this modern world, I think, is not that this type has disappeared. As I said, that we're still here. Nature's still pumping us out. Nature's going to win. She's not going to stop making us. It ain't going to happen. We're still going to be coming out. Even if they do class us as all mentally insane, the seers are being born. We're always going to be born in exactly the same proportion to how they've always been born, because that is the human species. We have this creative element that is constantly being put into our culture, our populations. The tragedy for us is that the cultural containers that used to be more sympathetic to this nature, we still have it, but it gets locked up into institutions, like it gets herded into sort of art is in art galleries. And that's why a lot of us are all a little bit in the head when we can't get into an art gallery, because we're just measuring ourselves by these fake containers. Like, you're not valid if you're an artist and you can't get into an art gallery. Well, that's all back the front, isn't it? See what I mean by the wrong measure? So the tragedy is that the cultural container that used to receive us, that used to say, ah, yes, you're one of those, here is your path, it's pretty much collapsed. It is collapsing. So in our modern West, we live in this economic system that values productivity, standardisation, and basically measurable output. And the creative nature is not standardised, is it? It's not easily measured. That's the whole point of it. That's what I was going on about, video about the muse, and having a humble or a stance of letting the unknown in other videos where I talk about launching into your artwork, not knowing what the outcome is going to be, and sometimes stopping with no outcome. This creative energy resists containers offered to it by its very nature. So it's always looking in from the outside, like restlessness, distraction, inconsistency, or in more clinical modern language, like ADHD, like disorder, like a problem to be managed. That's how we appear all the time. It's very tricky. And we start to believe that ourselves. We believe we're faulty because we're not getting that, oh my God, you're so creative. Let me just say this really clearly. In many cases, what's being diagnosed as a disorder is just, it's simply like a nature in the wrong container, the wrong measurement. The nature itself, your nature, isn't the problem. It's the container that's the problem. This is just such an important point to remember, okay? It's just trying to shove you in to the wrong container. And nobody, like not the school system or the economic system, sometimes the family, nobody stands up and says, hang on, before we try to fix this person, let's just ask whether the problem is the person or the fit. It's just completely overlooked unless you meet that person that says, I see you. Oh my God, it's such a great feeling, isn't it? Which brings us back to me sitting at the kitchen table with my brothers and my mum and the open road. And that question I was really asking when I was 12 years old. Honestly, you just couldn't get a better mum. I miss her so much. But maybe what I was looking for and projecting onto her as if she had to give it to me. And this is how we end up judging, like all this estrangement from our parents and loved ones. It's all based on this nonsense of judging them because they didn't give us what we wanted and what I wanted. I didn't want her to say, you can do anything you like, because I already knew I could do that because I was such a little rebel. What I was really wanting was for her to say, I see the specific shape of what's in you and I know what it is and I can tell you where it leads. But it just wasn't her way to do that. Without knowing it, she led the life of the Tao. She was very Buddhist naturally, even though she kind of really didn't know anything about that. It was just her nature. Oh, what a mum. Nobody gave me that answer, but when I did hear it from various, I had mentors, or it was usually strong women I'd bump into, and they'd say something and I'd just grab it. It's not your parents' fault, it's not your teacher's fault, it just doesn't happen. They're not withholding it, it just really isn't there to give, which is a lot to do with the culture. The cultural weather. I want to stay with this for a moment because I think it's important. It's almost like this is a story about cultural weather. So rather than letting ourselves slide into blaming bad parents, bad schools, bad teachers, bad bosses, bad art galleries, it's so easy and it's just too small to go for that. It's very low-hanging fruit. We just got to think about the world that our parents grew up in. Think about their parents for generations in most of those working class families, in most ordinary families around the world. The primary creative act of life was survival. Getting through, making enough, not falling behind. That's not a small thing. There's been so many changes if we look back through the First War and the Second War, what people were made to do, and then prior to the wars, wow, life does not stay the same. I'm not saying that was heroic, it just was what it was, and the value that it generates, the practicality, the reliability, contribution, not putting yourself above your station, they're not like villainous values, they're just the values of people who learn through hard experience what keeps a family alive. So the creative life from inside that value system looks like an indulgence. It looks like choosing the beautiful over the necessary. It looks like a risk that sensible people don't take. So it really does get quietly discouraged, and it's not through malice. The people doing this discouraging are trying to protect you from what they perceive as a dangerous path. We say, don't wrap them in cotton wool or they'll never be able to survive. And then you think, oh God, what are you supposed to do? That's, just as a mother, I can say that. So the problem for the creative person, with that nature, you're a born seer or a maker, the path we're being protected from is the only path that'll actually work. And unfortunately, that is being steamrolled. You can't take a nature that is built for depth and mystery and that creative complexity and force it into a container built for predictability and compliance. It'll keep escaping and creating problems. It'll keep reasserting itself and it'll make itself known, through restlessness, dissatisfaction, persistent nagging feeling that you're living someone else's life. It ends up in pathologies because you can't cope. The number of people with mental disorders should be a red flashing light. Why do we say, oh, look, everyone's got a mental disorder, instead of saying, oh my God, what have we done to create this disorder? All these people feeling disordered. But the mental disorder is the culture. Has anyone ever stopped to think about that? I've met people in their 60s and 70s who still have that feeling. They've always made sensible choices and built sensible lives, spending like 30 years with a low-grade feeling that they just didn't quite do the thing they wanted to do. It's like a grief of, I guess, an unlived creative life. Even I've got a bit of that over something I really wanted to do, and I'm only just now doing it. It's the grief of the permission that never came. And the saddest part is that many of them are still waiting. They're still convinced that if the right person would just look at their work and say the word, it would finally become real. Oh boy, that's so hard. It's such a tough one. The recovery. What do we do with all of this? How are we going to get out? How are we going to be empowered? We've looked at the wound and the mechanism for how it happens. How about we talk about what you actually can do about it? That's where we really should be going. What can you do now if you identify this? The first thing is to simply understand the mechanism. When you can see clearly that the permission that you don't even know you're seeking permission, but it was actually never withheld. You've got to know that's what we're doing. We're all walking around going, is this okay? Do you like this? That's okay. That's all part of how it works in a community. But it wasn't ever actually withheld. It just didn't exist, like in the consciousness of the culture. So when you get that, something shifts because you realise that you weren't denied anything. This is a big growing up point. And anger you might have at people who didn't give you what you wanted can just get that out of your life because it's just based on a misreading. We can get angry at people for not handing us something that they didn't really have. It wasn't really theirs to give. That's a different kind of grief. It's sort of quieter. In some ways, it's sort of sadder too. But it's cleaner because it empowers you. You don't need a villain anymore. That's hugely empowering. And the second thing I think is to understand how permission actually works, because this surprised me when I finally understood it. It's something that you give yourself, and it requires constant renewal because the culture keeps trying to take it back or just sort of remove it or wipe it out. It's the sort of thing, this permission thing, it doesn't kind of, rock up and then you've got it, you're locked it in forever. You don't get like this certificate, you have permission. You have to renew it constantly. It's like a bit like a license, sometimes daily. I think that's why people do affirmations. Every time someone questions what you do, every time the algorithms for people that do YouTubes, they look disappointing. Every time a gallery says no or you don't sell anything, you get dismissed by someone for what you've done creatively. Family member makes, some small sideways quip or comment about when are you going to get a real job? That permission comes under pressure again and again. And if you haven't really sort of locked it in and really internalized it, it's still sort of living just outside of you, and it's always in someone else's hands. Like just thinking of that image where I've got the little girl with the boat with the heart in it. It's terrifying. It's just so fragile. Here's my heart. Do with it as you will. The work of really building a creative life, like a whole life to be yourself, is partly like the work of building a permission structure, I reckon, that lives inside you and it doesn't depend on external validation to remain upright. That's hard work. That's a lifetime of work. It's harder than it sounds. It's just, words I'm throwing out there because we're social animals and we're wired for belonging. And I guess, belonging has always required some level of compliance with the tribe's values. That's how it goes. If you be silly, you should get chucked out. We shouldn't have anyone in government, really, should we? They're all being silly. So if you're a creative person and you put yourself into an exile because you can't stand it, you're cutting yourself off from human community and you can't go anywhere. So in a way, you're like one of those flappy doll things in the wind, or you're completely hidden and tucked away in a cave somewhere. That doesn't work at all. There's got to be this middle ground where we learn to actually come and go and stand the winds. I always think of us being born like a little seed, like a tree seed. And as we grow up, we have people chop bits off us and they don't like us. They might do a bit of poisoning or pee on our roots and might be too shady. But at some point, you've just got to keep going and get those roots down nice and deep so you can keep going despite all those things. You make it again and again. Soul making is something you do every single day, every time you have an interaction with someone, every time. It's so malleable, it's so transient. Over my lifetime, I've had quite a lot of instances where people have really put me down, very nasty, and I haven't done anything. And I find out about it and, oh, why? And upon really thinking about it, and this is where the Jungian work really helped me. I started to understand about projection. So people will project, their shadow onto you, and the more you might represent their unresolved parts, you might be succeeding in something that they can't get to. They'll just criticize you and make up stories about you. They'll invent them. So if we let that get at us, we're in trouble. It wastes so much creative energy. But here's what I can tell you, I guess after nearly 40 years of being in that position of having my creative work judged. It does actually get easier and you do get more confidence. And it's not because, the challenges stop coming. I think at times they actually get worse. Over a long time, your energy ebbs and fades. You're not just this art machine right from the start. You have a lot of other stuff going on. But it gets better because your internal voice gets stronger and the external voices get quieter in proportion. For me, I have had to isolate myself for quite a while, a few years now, to actually understand that better. And then you start to hear them for what they are. It's not authority, but as I said, it's weather. And you learn to work in all sorts of weather. Some days it's not very nice. I want to come back to something I mentioned at the beginning, that I came to painting to be an artist by pure accident. It was never my intention. And that's true in a literal sense. There was no roadmap, no guidance, not even a desire to be an artist. There wasn't a moment where someone in authority pointed me toward it and said, you should be an artist. Never, not once, not as a child, even though I was a pretty good painter. I had a great imagination. No one ever said it. I can show you paintings I did and I had no training. They were pretty wicked, pretty crazy. I was a poet. That's what I was. That's what I wanted to be, not a painter. It happened the way things often happen for people with our creative nature. It was really, I guess you'd say, obliquely. It was like a sideways opening, an accident, through what looked to me like coincidence and me just following an opportunity when it popped up. But I've come to believe after a very long time of thinking about that and talking about it, that there's no accidents of this kind. The nature, your nature, will find its path. And who knows what the medium will be. It might take longer than it should. It might take detours through things that don't seem to fit, different occupations, through years of trying to be someone more legible to the world around you to meet what you need. But it keeps finding its way back to itself. That's what I do know. So it doesn't matter to me whether I'm a painter or a writer at this stage of my life. I'm looking more to what is the more effective vehicle or vessel. And that's what I think about, is what is the most effective communicating vessel, and that allows what is in here to be communicated, and that communicates to someone who's observing or experiencing my work. That's my question. If writing does that, then I'll write. It's not whether that there's a path, it's how much of your life do you spend resisting it while you wait for someone to tell you it's allowed. That's the tricky part. I started painting because I guess I was curious, but I had no intention of it being a career. Nobody authorized it. Nobody gave me permission slip. I did get encouragement once I started that pushed me along a bit, but I just started, and the nature that had been looking for its container finally found one. Before I was painting, I was exploring Australia. I was travelling through the deserts of Australia for 10 years by myself and living in some very strange circumstances, doing very strange things. So I could always draw and write and paint, but I didn't care about it. It just happened because I was restricted and I had to stay in Broome and settle down, and I hated it. So everything that came after that, career and all the rest of it, and what I'm telling you now, all this conversation we're having right now, it all flows from that one unlicensed, unsanctioned beginning. No one said to me, oh, you look like you should be an artist, you should be an artist. That never got said to me. The only thing that mattered was what my grandma had said, and that was, wow, my dear, you have a very big imagination. So I want that for you. I want you to have that unlicensed beginning, if you haven't had it yet, or if it's on a bit of a bumpy path, or the unlicensed continuation if you've been doing it, starting and stopping because somebody's questioned it, you've been put down, or you get the doubts because it's not working out. Who gives the permission now? Let me be as direct as I can about this, because I think clarity is more useful here than comfort. The permission giver that you've been looking for, the parent who sees you clearly and teacher and all that jazz that we've gone through, the person that names your gift, the institution that validates your work, they're not actually going to be necessarily coming down your driveway. Honestly, it's probably harder for them to do that now. We've lost a lot of that hands-on stuff, but it does help if you're actually hanging out in the right places. But if they do come, they usually come after the fact, after you've already made your decision, and their arrival is less like a beginning and more like a confirmation of something that you already knew. Do you get what I mean by that? So that person you've been looking for, it's you. You know the saying, build it and they will come. That's the hard part. That's why I say, how do we get motivated? How do we get ourselves off our bums when we're in the sad sack thing? My way of doing that is to set myself challenges. So set yourself these painting challenges, even if it's not about a gallery, it's just what you put yourself through. I reckon that really does help. It's where you give yourself permission to achieve something. It's just that person that you are, you take charge. It's your permission. That future version of you is trying to reach back. It's do it enough times and you'll be able to say, oh, I know how I'm going to feel at the end of this month. I'm going to go, wow, I did that. That's how I do it. The future self can look back, and you've got to think about that future self. Look at how happy you're going to be. So yeah, get that in your head. You don't need permission from anyone who isn't actually you. You never have. The difference between the people whose work you admire, that they've really achieved something, and the people whose work you never see, it's not about talent. The most talented artists never get seen. The big difference is that at some point, the people you do see and whose work you might admire have decided not to wait, to actually just dive in. They gave themselves permission and said, get off the couch, get moving, get over there. And the interesting thing is that the thing I find endlessly moving is that the moment that you do that, the external permissions start arriving anyway. It just keeps moving. Not because you needed them, but because creative work that comes from a person who's claimed their authority, I can do this, carries a different quality. It's got something solid at its centre. You're a man on a mission or a girl on a mission. And people can feel the difference. They go, oh, look at you, not moping around. Even the galleries can feel it. The audience can feel it. Everybody sees it. The work itself knows the nature and the container. I want to end with the idea I started with. I have gone on about this because I think it's the most important one of all. You're born with a specific nature, a particular one, yours. There is a shape to how you see, how you process, what you're drawn to, what you can't leave alone. That shape was already there before anyone taught you anything. I know that I was born with the shape that I am. I know because I just have to listen to stories about myself as a little kid, the sort of things I did. Did stand out. And so the other kids, my other brothers, had their qualities. And I've always paid attention to that. And they've still got the same qualities that I observed in them when I was little. It's still there. They had them when they were little kids. Isn't that remarkable? Before the culture got its hands on you and started to make you into some sort of legible, clone, you were there. The shape is still there and it's never gone anywhere. It's the real you. It just waits for you under all those layers of, shoulds and ought and no, I can't do it and it's not practical and who do I think I am, etc. It doesn't care. It'll just sit there and wait for you and give you a hard time if you don't jump into it and use it. I reckon the work of reclaiming your creative life is largely the work of excavating back down to that original shape. I have stood by that. That's exactly the process I use to help someone dig into their core nature. That shape is never lost, it just gets buried, and that's the excavation work. It's not about getting anything back. It's about locating where it got buried and then building a life that actually best nurtures or holds it, instead of it being a life that fits everyone's ideas of what they think you should be. That's the hard part. When you see people getting it, very mature, creative people talking about their lives, oh boy, these people have really nailed it. You know, they're older and they have got to that stage. They really know who they are. But I'll be honest with you, it does take time because we are all busy. It really does. And you can't dress that up. I don't know. I think that the people watching this channel, you wouldn't be watching this if you were a shrinking violet about this. This would drive you nuts. You'd turn me off in 5 minutes. You know that this is you. You know that you're out to actually nail this soul-making stuff down. We're all just walking along together trying to work it out. We know the work is worth doing. We just want to get the monkey off our back that's actually squashed it. That's what I mean about taking away all the blockages and stuff that's been piling on for years, decades. Because at the end of your life, the question you find yourself asking isn't like, was I approved of? It's always something like, did I actually live my real nature? Did I do the things I really wanted to do? Did I make the things that were in me to do and make? Did I use the shape I was born with, or did I spend my life apologizing for it? I always say, I just want to use it up, use everything I've got. Just before I kick the bucket, I just want to expend it all. That's a really good idea, isn't it? We just need to stop waiting for someone else to give us that permission to begin. That's it. If this conversation has landed somewhere useful for you today, I know it's been a long one, I would genuinely love to know. Drop something in the comments. You always give me so much. You're such generous friends. You always tell me your stories and share your journeys. Tell me when the permission problem has showed up in your life. I really am interested. Tell me who you were waiting for, when it got blocked. Tell me if you've found your way out of that waiting, or if you're still in it. Because the permission problem goes a lot deeper than just being an artist, a writer, like a creative person. It runs right through the middle of actually being a human being. Writing and painting it's a vocation, it's not your being. I'll be exploring this theme much further in the book I'm currently working on, which is in many ways the fullest treatment I hope to be able to give to all of these ideas that I've been exploring on this channel. So when that time comes that I get it out, I'll let you know. Oh, so in the meantime, go and make something. Or see if you can remember when someone said something to you, whether it be in your childhood or your adulthood, any time that you just said, I will remember that for the rest of my life. That's where the clue is. And don't forget, if you've had someone said something to you that's been absolutely cut you right through the center, then look at that, because often in that is the insult is because it's the blindness of that person to what your true nature is. So they might say something, and why it insults you is because you know that it's the complete opposite of what they've said. And that can actually tell you also who you are. Working in the negative can give you some clues, even when you've been criticized in your work. So really think about that. Instead of taking it to heart, think, what did they get wrong about me? And because that can be a clue just as much as the good ones that you remember when someone got something right about you. All right, I'll talk to you in the next one.